Hello, and welcome to We're the Weirdos, Aunty-ji, a podcast by Weirdos Zine and Collective. My name is Neil, and I'm the editor of this podcast and occasionally the host. Weirdo exists to document and celebrate the experiences, perspectives and contributions of South Asian people in the alternative subcultures around the world. We do this for our print sign, articles on our website, events, and sharing stories via this podcast. In each episode of We Are the Weirdos, Aunty-ji, we interview a South Asian creative to find out about their journey in the alternative scene and their career today. Today's guest is Som Wardner. Som is the lead vocalist and guitarist of alt-rockers My Vitriol. My Vitriol released their seminal debut album, Finelines, in 2001 to huge critical acclaim. From the success of Finelines, the band soon found themselves achieving prominent live slots at festivals such as Glastonbury, B Festival, Reading and Leeds, as well as appearances on Top of the Pops. As a testament to their skills, they counted fans amongst peers, established artists and heroes alike, landing support slots with many of them. Butch Vig and Shirley Manson from Garbage, Chino Marino from Deftones, Placebo, A Perfect Circle, Feeder, Ash, to name a few. Unexpectedly, at the end of 2002, after 3 years of solid touring, Som announced their hiatus, and just like that, they were gone. However, in 2016, after a long break, My Vitriol returned with The Secret Sessions, a self-released album of new material. Despite not being a fully promoted official second album, many fans still refer to the collection as another masterpiece. This recording took place in April of 2023, right after touring the UK with 100 Reasons and Hell is for Heroes. Som discussed his successes with My Vitriol, as well as his experiences in writing and recording Finelines and the early days of the band. So without further ado, here's the Weirdo interview with Som Wardner. Welcome to the pod, Som. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
I caught you recently on your tour with Hell is for Heroes and 100 Reasons. How did that all go?
That was great, we jumped on that tour right at the last minute because it had been on sale, I think, since 2021 or whatever. We talked about playing with those guys multiple times because we come from sort of similar time periods with British rock music. We've kind of been friends for ages. And, we're going out on tour. And then, it was like, shall we jump on the tour right at the last minute? And we were like, yeah, why not? It'll be fun. So, and it was fun. It was great. But obviously we had to go on early because being the last edition, much, much later, we were announced 3 months before or maybe even less, I don't know, before the tour started. So we had to go on pretty early and stuff. And people were getting frustrated. A lot of fans, arrived early to see us, but the queues were so big around the block that it took so long for people to get in. Some people missed the first couple of songs or whatever, but it was great.
Yeah. I mean, I think you guys came on about, 7:30 in Birmingham? It was bonkers. I literally walked in and you guys were on.
Stage time was 7:20. Sometimes we knocked it back to 7:30. Yeah. I mean, what was interesting is that after every show, people were telling me that they were moved to tears, which was really interesting because obviously music was such an emotional thing for me as well. And as, a teenager and stuff, getting so moved by music is what inspired me to want to try and create music that would hopefully have the same emotional impact on people. And then, I don't tend to look into the audience because it can kind of put me off a little bit. And we hadn't played a show since, I think we did Japan in 2019 or whatever. So it'd been a long time. So I didn't want to get thrown off because I knew how rusty we were probably going to be. But after every show, when we met people and they said they were moved to tears or whatever, I think was it in Birmingham? Was it in Manchester? One gentleman, he was 39 years of age and he was with his son who was I think 17. And then he said, I was moved to tears. I said, oh, which song? And then he said, well, pretty much all of them. And then his son was like, yeah, I was pretty blubbing all the way through, that kind of thing, And that was quite touching. And I felt really like, wow, this is amazing. I'm making grown men cry and I don't even wear a bikini to do it,
To be fair, Sam, I mean, that's a sight to see. I do want to come off too much like a fan, really. I'm trying to hold back a little bit, but those songs are incredibly important to myself as well. And when you play something like Cemented Shoes, it's I have to sort of think about, I've been listening to this this album, these songs for like 20 years. Like, it's, I mean, you know, I discovered you guys when I was 15 years old, and now I'm 36. You got this one album, and it holds so much weight to this day. Where, like, from the person who wrote these songs, how does that make, you know, what kind of feeling is that? Describe that.
It's kind of magical that, you know, so many people that we don't know and stuff have let us into their lives. And you know, it is incredible because in London, so after I'd heard people say that, you know, that they were moved to tears and stuff, you know, I don't know, you know, we're not Lana Del Rey, we're a rock band, and we're still moving to people to tears. And so I was like quite intrigued. So after at London in the show, the Hammersmith Apollo, 4 songs in, when everything, the technical gremlins hadn't turned up and that things were running fairly smoothly, I decided I would look into the audience. And lo and behold, I did see some people who looked very like they were crying or they were very emotional. Then I saw other people who looked like they were having an orgasm on the moon, like they were out in space, you know, blissing out. Like, and then I saw other people kind of like pumping their fists like you do at a rock gig. And I was like, hang on a minute, we've got all those 3 emotions like at the exact same time. How did we manage that? It was wonderful, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting. One thing I will say from the audience, and the couple of times I've seen you over the years, I've sort of glanced around, and the people there seem to be really, really into you. There's no like curious folk. They're just people who like, I mean, I don't know, you probably have a different perspective, but everybody seems to know you guys, and they know every word to every song on the album. Which is really interesting. We're like this small kind of group of people who just love your band.
Yeah, they are very, I mean, I joked in the BBC that like the longer it was that we didn't release an album, you know, the more fanatical people kind of got. And like, meaning, so most other people kind of like, you know, that just sort of went off and found other bands to listen to or whatever. But there was a core group of people that, you know, stuck around for like 20 years. But I mean, I was kind of joking when I said like, you know, they must be nuts or whatever. But it really, you know, it is a really beautiful thing that those songs actually meant so much to them. And we have very, very loyal fans in that way. And it's a blessing. You know, there's so many bands that were much bigger than us back in that day. You know, they had much more exposure or whatever. I don't want to name names because that's not really very nice. But, you know, they sold a lot more records. They, you know, had more exposure, etc. But you know, literally never hear about them anymore. And even though sometimes these bands tour and they don't really have many people turn up or whatever. So it really is quite, we know that it's incredibly lucky, but it's because we went the extra mile. You know, we really didn't do it for anything other than the music. We were fanatics about music, you know. And despite our inexperience, you know, getting signed after only 7 gigs and 7 months and hardly knowing each other and all that stuff, you know, Ravi and I obviously live next door to him. We can talk about that because it's kind of interesting how all that panned out, especially if you're focusing on the South Asian stuff, you know, Ravi being Tamil and me being Sinhalese. But the you know, that was being pushed in the deep end and learning how to swim. And I burned myself out because I knew how lucky we were to actually have that opportunity that so many other, you know, thousands of musicians around the world would love to have. And there I've been given it. We went that extra mile for that reason. And even the first, you know, the cover story we got on the NME or whatever, I mentioned like 20 bands to try and give everybody else a leg up of all my friends' bands and stuff. And I was like, oh, I don't know if we're part of a scene, I said, but there's so many great bands in London and around the country. And I named them all. And they cherry picked about, I don't know, quite a lot actually, about 10 of the 20 I said. So I was hoping to give everybody a leg up. And so I knew how lucky we were. So I would really work very hard. Like all my waking hours had something to do with the band, you know. And I think the rest of the band had more of a healthy work-life balance, you know. It was very easy for them to check out and go, right, okay, I've done my bit in the studio, I'm off or whatever. But for me, it was just always on. And that's what really made me burn out. But on the good side of that is that, you know, really caring about, like really wanting to put, you know, I even structuring the album, Finelines, the way the order of the tracks run and all that stuff, and the keys and how they work into each other. There was stuff that I really paid a lot of attention to, and so it feels nice when people recognize the hard work you put in, you know.
And when you listen back to those songs, do you ever listen back to those songs? Actually,
it was hard for me to listen to Finelines for a long time because it didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. Meaning there were aspects of it that I think turned out great, like some of the guitar sounds and all that stuff. But there were other stuff. I don't think Ravi and I, either of us, were particularly happy with the drum sounds. We're getting closer to that stuff now. I wasn't really happy with the vocal sort of takes. That was partly my fault, but not being too experienced. I didn't really consider myself a singer at all. I mean, I still don't. I don't even consider myself a musician. There are people who play musical instruments much better than me. I'm self-taught. I'm just a guy who loves music and happens to play these, musical instruments to create music, basically. That made it very hard so it was such a painful birthing experience that it was very hard for me to listen to Finelines without the critical side coming out. But then, after years passed by, I actually went to see my friend Chris. He used to be in Three Colors Red, and he was blaring my music out as I arrived, probably to embarrass me or whatever, but he was probably just trying to remember, because he promotes gigs and stuff. And then I kind of went, shit, this is actually pretty good, or whatever, And it was almost like a third person perspective a little bit more, which is very important, by the way, in anything creative, is taking a third person perspective, removing, the bias of the self from it,
Yeah, absolutely. So let's wind it back then. It was interesting that you said you and Ravi lived next door to each other. Did you say that?
Yeah, in Hull. So that's how we met. It was completely by coincidence, because we were both at UCL studying different degrees, so we weren't even going to meet in our degrees. He was doing biochem, I was doing human genetics for my sins. It's because I had the grades. I it was the whole Asian parent thing of, you've got the grades, have something to fall back on to. I didn't apply to Oxford or Cambridge, because I didn't, from a political perspective, I didn't like the fact that Oxford and Cambridge wouldn't allow women and Anglicans, I think it was, because you couldn't be Jewish, you couldn't be Catholic and get an education. And UCL was set up by a guy called Jeremy Bentham, who's Jewish, who happened to basically open that up to everybody. And I love the idea of that foundation of UCL, like opening up for everybody, whether you're women, Jews, Catholics, everybody, right? So
yeah,
and obviously it's London. So I was like, okay, London's better for music maybe, and that turned out to be absolutely right. It was the same for Coldplay, of course, who were also in UCL with us just before us, if I'm exactly right. And then it was just fortune that Ravi happened to be next door to me. I was F6 and he was F5 in Goldsmith Hall, and he happened to be a great drummer. It was really funny because, he would literally have his drum kit in his room, and I would have I would plug it into my hi-fi speakers, and we would be jamming guitar to drums across the like really loud, and the lady of the house, Moira, would come up and she'd just open the door and just look at me. What the hell do you think you're doing, And the funny thing is, when we did Top of the Pop a couple of times or whatever, I actually went back because I had to get my mail that was being delivered to the hall. And then she turns to me and she's like, this Irish woman, she's just so lovely. She was great. She was actually very supportive, even though we were being idiots for playing it so loud in the bloody hall. The whole hall could hear it, But she turns to me, she goes, Som, I always knew you were going to be famous. And I'm like, well, if Top of the Pops counts as fame, fair dues, We hadn't actually got together. My band at school was quite popular or whatever locally. It was called Shock Syndrome, and it was just a bunch of school friends or whatever. And I'd never been in another band, and I come to UCL and I was trying to put one together. And then I found that it was quite interesting because, unlike my friends at school, which kind of listened to a lot of the same music, so we had that starting point. In UCL, it was people from all sorts of different, musical backgrounds. So it was really, and a lot of the musicians were actually quite like the proper musicians, people who can sight read like crazy and grade 8 and everything, kind of like my sister. She's the proper musician, not me. I'm self-taught completely, But then, Ravi and I happened to be by fate next door. And even though we had some, Venn diagram of crossover of music, there was a lot of difference as well, which, initially it might be a bit of a struggle, but actually turned out to be an asset that we can both learn from each other and all that stuff. But then the CD ended up on the radio with Steve Lamacq when I gave it to him. The story is kind of funny because we had a CD that was, a friend of Ravi's actually put us in the studio, and we came up with this thing that it sounded like a mess, but there was some kind of emotion in there. There was some magic there, and Steve kind of, so I was forced by my friend who loved the CD. He was like, "You have to give Steve Lamacq the CD," and I'm like, "Oh no, I can't do that." And he just bounds up to Steve, go, "You have to listen to this man's music. It's brilliant." And then I go, "Oh no," and I give it to Steve, and I go, "Oh, it's a bit shit." And then Steve bursts out laughing, and he goes, "Normally when people give me their CD, they tell me they're going to be the new like Radiohead or Nirvana, and you just told me it's shit." And I go, "Well, I don't think we did the best job of it." And then nothing really happened. And then a couple of weeks later, or whatever, I bump into him at some gig. It was just in the loo or something. And then he says, "Oh, I've been meaning to listen to your record. It's been at the top of my pile. I've just been too busy." And I just thought, he's just, he probably didn't like it or whatever. And I said, "Oh, no big deal, whatever." And then the very next day, get all these phone calls coming in. "Quick, turn on Radio 1." And then there it was. And it sounded great on the radio. And he goes, "Well, when the singer gave me the CD, he told me it was rubbish. I mean, that's the word I can use on air. But it wasn't rubbish. It's one of the best things I heard in ages. But we had to spend about 45 minutes cleaning up the hiss off of it." And then he wrote that in his biography, saying it was the demo that really made him rekindled his faith in new music or whatever. And I think what he picked up on that was that excitement that we had. And it's really such an emotional thing. And this is what, my production protocol I have, in my head is perfection is boring, but mistakes are a distraction. And it's between those, that's the framework that you have to apply. Mistakes are a distraction, but perfection is boring. And you have to get that emotional, there has to be an emotional connection. And even if the particular mix isn't perfect, if it makes you feel something, go with that. Forget the praise. And this is something that we've done wrong, and so many other people have done wrong, is you tweak and tweak and tweak, and you keep tweaking, you're making it more perfect, and you don't realize, but you've lost the feeling. And 10 different mixes down the road, it sounds much better, like technically everything's clearer and all that stuff, but you've completely lost the emotion. Just the X factor's gone.
So that was the Delusions of Grandeur. Is that correct?
What? Yeah. Hence the title, with the Buddha with the guitar. Yeah, that's the one.
I haven't thought about that for a long time. And what was on there?
There was always on there. There was Infantile. There was Cemented Shoes, Tongue Tied. There was like By the Water, which we've actually rekindled just to do as a release maybe sometime soon, because it's kind of really vibey. It's really energetic and kind of punky in a way, which I kind of like. I've started to miss some of the punkiness around, because that's kind of disappearing a little bit. So I'm all, that's me, the contrarian, whatever I get. So I was, we start doing the shoegaze or whatever you want to call it, like when it was completely uncool. And then when after Finelines, I was going down a synth avenue, and My Old World Implodes actually sound great from that time. But I said to, the guy who signed us, like, I'm going down a synth avenue. And he goes, "Oh no, as long as you don't tell me Depeche Mode. I was thinking more Alien Ant Farm and Papa Roach for you guys." And I'm like, oops. And I actually reminded him of that after the Killers broke into 2004 or 5 or whatever. I said, "Remember when I said Depeche Mode and you said, oh no, it should be Alien?" He goes, "You're a fucker, you're a fucker. You were right, you were right." And when I was a kid, I was watching this cartoon about the Beatles. Well, it was a Beatles cartoon that most people don't even know exists, but it was shown in Sri Lanka. And I remember watching it, and I said to my mum, "Who is this Beatles?" Because I didn't think they were real. I thought they were a cartoon or whatever, but I loved the music. And she goes, "Oh no, they're like the most famous band in the world, And then I saw, like, I discovered their songs, like, and I remember crying. The first time I ever cried to a song was Eleanor Rigby. I asked my mum, "What does he mean, all the lonely people?" And my mum said something to the effect of, "Oh, maybe it's because, you're born alone and you die alone." And then literally I ran into the other room and started crying. I don't think my mum even realized, but I was quite a sensitive sod, And music, what like really I took to Michael, obviously Jackson, that kind of stuff, and music was a huge, like, it really gave me so much like joy, and but not just joy. It was just, it made me very emotional in good and bad ways, I guess, But I was just really fascinated how like melodies can make you cry or whatever and that kind of stuff. And now it's very interesting thinking how life pans out, because obviously Tasha's our bass player. Her grandfather is Ringo, the Beatles. So
yeah, I didn't realise that until Ravi told me on in the Birmingham gig. Because after I had a chat with you, I bumped into him, and I said, "Who's your bass player?" And he was like, "Oh, that's the granddaughter of Ringo Starr." I was like, "What?"
Tash is our friend. I mean, we don't make a big deal out of it. She's a great bass player. She's in the band because she's actually great. You know, she really likes the music. She gets it. The way we look at music is very, Tasha and I, kind of very similar in that to us, it's all about the feel. It's not about technicality as much as it's about feel, you know. Rav is the tech, he's a tech wizard. You know, he's really into Neil Peart, and he's really into technical drumming. And, you know, that's kind of style of drumming I actually liked when we first met was completely diametrically opposite to Rav. Because obviously Ringo comes from that feel drumming, right? He's a great song drummer. It wasn't, with Ringo Starr, it was never about standing out as an exceptional drummer, but having to be in a song, because that's the only way a drummer would get attention. A drummer would get attention. That wasn't Ringo Starr. Ringo Starr was about, they were called the Beatles, right? The Ringo Starr was actually making those songs the best that they could be, which is kind of like Dave Grohl in Nirvana. It wasn't the technical wizardry. It was the feel, it was the gut, you know. And that's the school of drumming that I was into, you know, when Ravi and I met. And it was kind of interesting because he was from the completely other side. He was very prog rock, and he didn't even hit the snare drum with the, you know, he didn't rim the snare and all that stuff, which is very, as he said back then, very power drummer thing to do. He was into Neil Peart, and as all technical drummers are, because Neil Peart's a genius, you know. For more than ways than just drumming, by the way. Neil Peart was an incredibly intelligent guy. But we sort of met somewhere in the middle, which is really what being in a band is about, isn't it? You know, it's about learning from each other, and I think, you know, we both have. And but yeah, the Beatles thing is just, you know, it's quite remarkable. We don't make a big deal out of it because, you know, it's a bit of a like a gimmicky kind of thing. Like, no thanks. We haven't even played Liverpool. I think every single review that we had, not a single one actually mentioned that. Some of them said it was great to have a bass player back or whatever, but nobody actually mentioned that, you know, Tasha's grandfather is, you know, in one of my favorite bands. But there you go.
Yeah. So the Beatles were an initial influence for you then. And was it the Beatles that influenced you to pick up the guitar?
No, actually, not the guitar. That was Nirvana. The thing about the Beatles, I think, is like a lot of genius, it works on multiple levels. Meaning, if you're a songwriter, you know how brilliant their songwriting is, especially if you look at like Because, or, you know, see how the harmonies work. It's just really quite phenomenal. And also how their chord progressions. The one thing I really love about the Beatles is, you know, they twist the way they twisted stuff. Back in the 60s, you know, the palette was much greater than it became later. With Nirvana, I know they simplified it down to, you know, people sort of think they're a 3-chord wonder, but they're not, because again, Kurt would always try to find that missing chord and go out, like in Lithium, for example, that 5th chord there is going out of what you would normally go to, which is what makes it sound sad. You know, so I'm so happy because today, and on that day, you go to that chord, which is a major chord, but it sounds sad because of the way he's structured that, you know. So that's the genius in Kurt. And Beatles had a lot of that going on as well, songwriting wise. They weren't pedestrian. There was something exceptional, but a child could love it. That's the key about the Beatles, is that, you know, a child would sing it like they were singing a nursery rhyme because the melodies were so catchy and, you know, kind of in some ways simple. But there was also a complexity that only the advanced listener would actually pick up on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a massive Beatles fan myself, and I couldn't agree more. When I was growing up in the late 90s and early 2000s, Nirvana would never look sort of likened to the Beatles, but now it's like they're very much likened to the Beatles because I can hear it. And I know Kurt Cobain was like a massive fan, but it's that effective simplicity, isn't it? That just sort of works so well.
Lots of similarities, you know. So the Beatles, they were actually considered quite heavy at the time. People didn't realize this because obviously rock music and all that, people, if you listen to Helter Skelter, you can hear sort of like the blueprint of a lot of that noisy rock that came much later, the Sabbath and all that. Sabbath are a huge fan of the Beatles too. Now, yeah, the similarities with Nirvana is that it was basically really loud pop music, you know, because it was pop music, but in the rock format, but the loudest it was of its generation, you know. And in a way, I kind of like gave up on just trying to be the loudest, you know, like because there was a saturation point where you couldn't get much further. And you know, I love heavy music, don't get me wrong, but like the important thing about those two bands, even though the loudness is really what got them a lot of attention, you know, the Beatles, it was a beat spelt like that because there was a strong beat compared to a lot of the stuff that came before it. And people don't know that now because we have a different frame of reference, right? But and Paul McCartney, they used to scream, you know, they used to go wow into the, you know, into the re-intro or whatever. And so all of that stuff, you know, did originate from the Beatles and that and those bands, but they obviously they metastasize into different things. But technology has obviously changed the way we now listen to music, and on hi-fis, like, you know, things Nevermind sounds great on a hi-fi, but it doesn't sound as great on a laptop or an iPhone, you know. And I think that's the key that all of us bands from the rock genre have to really evolve and with the times, otherwise we'll get left behind, you know. I mean, even Nevermind itself was a monumental leap forward in terms of, because of the CDs, right? Because that Rage Against the Machine first album and Nevermind, you know, you could put a lot of bottom end on it without blowing, because with the vinyl, when you had to master for vinyl included, right? So as long as vinyl was still selling, there was a problem on your hand, because you could never mix a record with too much bottom end because it would it would just distort the whole thing. But by 1991, 1992, which is like Rage in 93, you know, people weren't really buying vinyl anymore. During the time of Thriller, Michael Jackson, people were buying all three formats. They bought the vinyl first, then they bought the tape to carry around in their Walkman, and then they would buy the CD because it sounded better when it came out, right? So, but once the vinyl wasn't a consideration, and even the tape, and it was just the CD, you could really crank up that bottom end. And that's when the kick drum really started to kick. Because prior to that, it was like AC/DC's album that everybody thought was like the blueprint for, you know, a heavy rock album, you know, and that got to the closest you could get to with that kind of heavy sound. But then after, you know, all the Andy Wallace stuff, because he came from a hip hop background, as you know, so he turned that kick drum up really loud. And that's what really changed the sound of modern rock. Where you know, because the sound of acoustic drums, I can't stand them. I've got to be honest. I even said that to Andy on the tour. I'm like when we were rehearsing, I was like, I bloody hate the sound of these acoustic drums. I don't want to hear it. It sounds better once it's gone through the PA and once it's gone through compression and all that stuff. That's what I want to hear. And it's giving me bloody tinnitus, you know, like those damn cymbals, you know, pretty bad. I can hear it really loudly as I but, you know, I'm going deaf for a living, like Steve Lamacq said in his book.
I'm going deaf for a living like that.
I was basically realizing that was damaging my health a lot with that stuff. And then at that point, I said to myself, you know, I'm not in this to end up with a bullet in my head or whatever, right? I'm in this because I love music. And if music is a thing that I'm now having to escape from, then just stop. You know, only do music if you really, really want to, meaning because when bands sign contracts and they're forced to churn out albums, you know, in that cycle, they have a hit album, and then what happens is they end up touring it. Sure, there's a lot of excitement around that, and that's great, but you can end up with no time to really, you know, hone your new material or whatever, and then suddenly you're like, okay, release the next album and quick, and then they rush it out, and then it's a disaster for most people, and you take, you know, one step forward but two steps back, and if you do that twice, which is what happened to a lot of bands, you know, then because the second album often has like a couple of good songs on it, right? But the first album had loads of good songs on it, and then the third album didn't have any exceptional songs. It was just retreading, you know, your formula, and at that point you lose the passion for it, and people lose the passion for you, you know. I don't know if you heard the Secret Sessions.
I did.
Yeah. So that was never meant to be like a piece, an album. It's just a collection of songs. You know, it was, people were writing it to us for so many years saying, please do more. I love every single song you've released, blah, blah, blah. you've got to come up with more. It was like an addiction that then I had to feed it. So I was like, okay, right, let's do it. People were selling me these different ideas over the years, like, oh, let's do this kind of format. Let's do the. I was like, okay, let's try this idea of a crowdfunder. Okay, great. No, there's a reason why the Pledge Music thing went down, you know, because the problem is it's the creative endeavor isn't like making a burger where you can predict it, you know, and I think the problem with a lot of people is that they've got so much into this consumerist, you know, society ideas that they think it's just like about. So when it got, you know, me and Rav were doing the work of like an entire team of people because we wanted to, you know, out of respect to our fans that have been with us so long, it wasn't an economic exercise. The whole thing was going to lose money, and we pretty much knew it. But it was a case of, you know, having respect for the people that have, you know, been with us for so long. So we did it, and it was going to be tough work, and we knew it was going to run for a long time. Ravi had a kid, you know, we had all these things to try and manage. We're doing, the two of us, you know, me in particular, of course, was doing the work of multiple people. You know, literally every waking hour, I was doing something with that whole thing. And we never released a record on our own imprint before. All these paperwork stuff that you never think about, AP2 licenses, all this kind of crap that you've got to put together. It's just a nightmare. But anyway, it runs late, and then some people are going to start complaining, like they think they're ordering a burger at McDonald's and it's been delayed by a fucking, you know, hour or a month or whatever. It's you know, and that really made me kind of a little bit jaded. I'm like, hang on a minute, we're doing this for you at a loss, right? And some people were getting really like irrational and almost like we owed them something. And I was like, hang on a minute. And then, but you know, as it transpired, and Pledge Music could confirm this, which is why I copied them in on the email chain, you know, like it was only 8 people that asked for a refund. 8, right? And we gave a refund to 3 other individuals who refused to take it, but they were constantly complaining every time it was delayed. But, you know, at that point, if you're a rational human being, you've got 3 options. Like, number 1, cancel the entire project. Well, why would you? That's a waste of all your time. Number 2, release it unfinished. Well, why would you? Right? Because if it's unfinished, no one's going to be happy. Or number 3, just offer refunds for whoever is, you know, getting upset with the delayed timeline. And if you so wish to come back, you can. And if you don't ever want to hear from us ever again, so be it. That's your choice. We're not forcing anyone to like our music. We're not forcing anyone to contribute to. It's not like we all bought tickets to Barbados and holidayed with the money. You know, we had to put our own money into it. It lost money technically, right? So I mean, that made me even more jaded. I kind of went, because, you know, there's a part of me that goes, all right, I did this for you. And where were you there to stick up for me when these guys were being unfair? And it gave ammunition to the detractors from all these, you know, people who were essentially jealous of the exposure we got or whatever. Oh, yeah, we're much better band than, or we're more talented. Or, you know, there's always these people that come up with that stuff. Despite how much I tried to help other artists, there are people who are driven by envy, you know, and they tend to coalesce together. And they tend to just want to cause you harm, you know. And that, obviously, the delays gave these people, like, you know, something to smirk about. And you know, and there you have it. And I was sitting there going, so where is everybody else sticking up for us here? Because we're not the bad guys.
Does that have any explanation on why there was such a big gap between Finelines and the Secret Sessions?
It wasn't a particularly pleasurable experience making either record, right? I got sick of fighting, frankly. Because you got to fight record companies who don't really understand what you want to do. You got to fight. It's just, I just got sick of fighting. And at some point, I've got to be honest, and the guys know it because I tell them all the time. I felt like I was fighting alone, and everybody else was willing to just have the good stuff, but not do the dishes after or whatever, or like. And I was like, well, I feel like I'm on my own here, you know. And I you know, and that I think is a big part of it, yeah. Because if we were all in a boat together, like, you know, like rowing in the same direction, then I think we would have got to the other side much quicker and easier. But sometimes, I mean, you know, this may be a little bit unfair, but it did feel like sometimes people were in the same boat as me, but pushing in the other direction, like rowing in the bloody other direction. I'd be like, what the hell's going on here? You know, but, you know, but these are the kind of things that happen in every band. All you have to do is watch, you know, Some Kind of Monster, the tensions between Lars and, you know, James. That was, you know, that's a classic. You got to watch Get Back.
It's 2023, right? Do you have any advice for people looking into getting into a band or starting to write music in this current climate?
The music industry's changed so much. I don't know, right? Like those bands like Chili Peppers and Muse don't even have top 40 hits anymore. They don't even scrape anywhere near. The biggest bands in rock just don't have top 40. So I don't even know how you would get in there. Now it's all viral and stuff. But having said that, I want to try and offer something positive. Just saying I don't know isn't good enough. So I would say the good news is that there's a lot of technology that makes it much easier to create music now than we ever had. Even learning how to play the guitar, I had to do it intuitively and teach myself. There were never any YouTube tutorials for me as a kid. Learning how to write songs, I had to do it completely, intuitively, just by playing other people's songs, and then things would go in subconsciously. But now you've actually got very detailed, videos about what makes a good song and all this kind of stuff. I never watched any of that stuff because, I think it takes the mystery out of the whole thing for me. But there's so many, tools that at young people's disposal now that I never had at that same age of like 14 or whatever, And I think it's technology is, obviously a double-edged sword, but it's incredible what you can achieve now on a laptop, compared to like the 4 tracks of the past. So I think now people really have to, learn how to use the modern formats really. But the key is to always write songs and make sure they sound fresh. I mean, if you're just doing what everybody else is doing, I don't think you're going to stand out. You've got to do something that sounds fresh, and it's got to have an emotional connection. That's the key, really.
So do you think if you were, however old you were when you first started My Vitriol now, do you think you wouldn't aspire to the heights you achieved, given the landscape of music right now?
I mean, nobody calls themselves My Vitriol and expects to be a household name. Every time anyone is My what? Exactly, So our success was, success is a relative thing, right? When Alanis Morissette released that second album and it sold 8 million, it was considered a failure because her first album sold whatever it was, 30 million or whatever, one of the highest selling of all time. So everything's it's a relative thing. Success is a relative thing. As far as I'm concerned, we were very successful because we got way beyond anything we ever thought we would. We didn't think we were going to end up on top of the pops and top 40 hits when At the Drive-In and Queens of Stone Age didn't have them. We didn't dream of thinking that we would end up with those hits when those bands didn't, So I'm very grateful for how it went, and I'm really grateful to how loyal our fans have been, to stick with us for so long. But I do think, why not think big? You don't necessarily need to think like me. I'm a bit odd, If you're listening to this and you want to be the biggest band in the world, you do that, like go for it. I'm all behind you. That wasn't our thing to do, but then why be like us? Go be like, I don't know, Coldplay or Muse. Go for it, And I saw that because obviously I know Chris, know Coldplay. He said anything less than number 1 isn't good enough. I remember him saying that to me, like it was yesterday. And we were both young and naive, and and so enthusiastic about music. And I said, but Chris, Nirvana and Radiohead haven't had a number 1. And he goes, yeah, but I want one. And he finally got it. Like, I think 4th album, he got a number 1 hit song. Yeah, Viva La Vida or whatever.
I suppose they transcended beyond the Radiohead and Nirvana. They exist in a space that doesn't even... It's beyond that. I can't even explain what that is, what Coldplay are,
It's popular music. Like, well, they said... So when we headlined the second stage and they headlined the first stage at a festival called Quat in Norway, or we were going through and Chris goes, make way for the new U2. And I went, wait, where did that come from? U2? I thought it was meant to be like Radiohead and all that. So that was in 2002 or something, 2001. So there was revealed the real aim was to become this sort of biggest rock stadium band and cross into the pop world. And that's what I'm saying to people listening to this. Think big, because Chris did. For me, I just wanted to be in an alternative band. Being in the next Blonde Redhead would have been fine for me. Being the next My Vitriol, I guess, or whatever. So, and in that case, yeah, all right, fine. I'm happy with everything. But, Chris was thinking a lot bigger. And I remember saying this to Johnny. I love Johnny. He's such a sweet guy. I said to him, I think you guys are going to be bigger than Radiohead. And he goes, really? I said, yeah, because I can imagine even like people's grandmas really appreciating your music. He goes, I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult. But no, it's a compliment.
Well, Som, you were right. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Som. It's been great having you on the show.
Yeah, it's been great fun.
Thank you for listening to We Are the Weirdos Aunty-ji, a podcast by Weirdos Zine and Collective. Weirdo is a volunteer-run project that was created to document and celebrate the experiences, perspectives and contributions of South Asian people in alternative subcultures across the diaspora and Indian subcontinent. If you want to find out more about us, join our collective or support our work, visit our website weirdozine.com and follow us on Instagram at weirdo.zine.